Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Darian and today we're going to be talking about the best books that I read in 2024. So in 2024, I had a very okay reading year. I did fairly well in terms of quantity. I read 83 books, which I'm pretty sure is the same amount I read in 2023. I did not reach the elusive 100 books this year, but 2025, mark my words, is gonna happen. But a lot of the books that I read were honestly quite average. So these 10 books that I'm going to be talking about, they are the cream of the crop, as you would say. I love these books so much, especially the top 4, I would say, are like new favorite books of all time. But however, before we get into the top 10 books of the year, we have to talk about the honorable mentions. So without further ado, here are the books that I loved this year that didn't quite make the top 10.
I used to float, now I just fall down. I used to know, but I'm not sure now what I was made for. What was I made for? Taking a drive, I was an ideal, looked so alive. Turns out I'm not real, just something you paid for. What was I made for? 'Cause I don't know how to feel, but I wanna try. I don't know how to feel, but someday I might. Someday I might.
A moving tribute, as always. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get into the top 10 books of 2024. So honestly, I did rank these, but I would say like between 6 and 10. These books are kind of interchangeable. If you asked me tomorrow, these might be in a different order. And then books 1 to 4, again, I mean, that one is more concrete, that order, but 6 to 10 is really like, sorry, not 6 to 10, 5 to 10. It kind of fluctuates more. The top 4 are really like the top 4. Anyway, so number 10 is a book that I read in February, I think. I actually finished this book on my birthday, which was a great way to spend my birthday. But that was Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I just feel so happy looking at this book. But this is the 3rd book in the Brown Sisters trilogy. If you don't know, Talia Hibbert wrote a romance trilogy following 3 Brown sisters. Kind of self-explanatory, and this is the youngest sister, Eve Brown. She is kind of known to be very irresponsible. She has a hard time keeping a job, mostly because she loses interest very quickly. She really doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She feels kind of lost. She just really likes trying new things and seeing if she likes them, and if she doesn't, she moves on, tries something else. And her parents are quite wealthy, but they are kind of tired of her just like messing around trying new things all the time instead of sticking with something. So they basically cut her off financially and say, you're not gonna get this money back until you keep a job for a year. And so this kind of throws her for a loop because now she has to find something that she actually wants to keep for a year, which has never really happened before. So she's driving away from this conversation and she passes this B&B that has a help wanted sign on the window, and she's like, oh my god, this is perfect. She goes in and they are conveniently holding interviews at that very moment. So she goes in and meets the manager of the store. What's his name again? Jacob. Oh, love Jacob. So she meets manager. She meets Jacob, the manager of the store, and he immediately does not get a good vibe from her. Jacob likes doing things a certain way, and she seems to like go with the flow for him. She's too quirky, and she's also really pretty, which is really inconvenient. And so they don't get off on the best foot, and then Eve leaves the interview being like, Kay probably won't get that job, and so she starts to drive away with her car, and oh no, she hits Jacob. So Jacob's fine, but he does break his arm, and he does most of the cooking at this B&B, so he's kind of forced into having Eve replace him, and she finds out that maybe she's actually good at cooking. She starts working at this B&B, and she starts to really enjoy this job and really enjoy being around Jacob, and he notices maybe he enjoys being around her too. And oh my god, this romance was so sweet. This is like by far my favorite in the series. It's the only one I gave 5 stars. I just thought it was so cute. I loved Jacob. I loved him so much. One of my favorite like male love interests ever. Jacob is also autistic, and I thought that rep was done really well. And I just loved him. I loved her. And I also saw a lot of myself in Eve. And I think if I'm remembering right, she's 26 in this book. And I finished this when I turned 26. So it just, the stars aligned, and I really loved it. So if you haven't read the series yet, I really do recommend it, but this one's my favorite. And yeah, I just loved it. So I feel like I should mention before I continue that a lot of these books, I am really bad at remembering things that happen in books. So if you've read any of these and you're like, how could she not mention this in the book? It's because I forgot. I remember the feelings I get when reading a book. I don't always remember all the plot points, so I'm sorry if I leave things out, but I'm just here to gush about the books I love this year and how they made me feel. It's not so much about the plot of these books. But anyways, this is actually a book I read very recently, and is the reason that I always wait until the year ends before I film this video, because if I had filmed this video like at the beginning of December, like some people do, I wouldn't have included this book. But that book is When the World Tips Over by Jandy Nelson. Now you may know Jandy Nelson from a certain other book that might be mentioned later in this list, I don't know. But this is her newest book, and it's her first release in I think 10 years. So this is another YA contemporary, and it is about these 3 siblings, the Fall siblings, I think that's their last name. Do I remember their first names? Dizzy, Miles, and something. I don't remember, but you're following these 3 siblings. It's 2 brothers and a sister, and they all kind of seem to be a little stuck in their lives, but you don't really know much about them at the beginning of the book. All you know is that Dizzy, who is the youngest, feels very close with her older brother, who I don't remember his name. I feel like it starts with an F. But anyway, she feels very close with her older brother, not so much the middle brother. Miles, I'm pretty sure is his name. He is very like recluse. He keeps to himself. He doesn't talk very much. And they live with their mom, and their dad abandoned them many years ago. And that's kind of a hurdle in their lives that none of them have really quite gotten over, even though it happened so long ago. Like, he left when Dizzy was a baby, so she doesn't even remember him. So basically, the inciting incident of this book is Dizzy almost gets hit by a car, but somebody pushes her out of the way, and Dizzy thinks this is like her angel. She says, an angel saved me, I have to find my angel. And then this angel, who turns out to be just a girl, shows up in the other siblings' lives as well. And then throughout the book, you kind of go back and forth in time, so you learn about this girl, this angel girl, her upbringing, and how her life connects with these 3 siblings. And I don't really want to say more than that, because I really knew nothing going into this book. And Jandy Nelson, her writing is just so for me. I love her writing so much. It's very like magical. There's a lot of points in this book where I was like, is this magical realism or is this just fiction? And I'll let you figure that out for yourself, because she states a lot of like, she uses a lot of like metaphors and allegories, but the way she writes them, it takes you a second to realize like these things are not actually happening. And it was the same with I'll Give You the Sun. So if you liked her writing in I'll Give You the Sun, you will like her writing in this. It is very reminiscent of I'll Give You the Sun, and I just really loved it. I loved reading her writing again. I can't wait to see what she writes next. I hope it doesn't take another 10 years for her to write a book, but we'll see, I guess. But I loved it. I definitely cried at the end of this book. And like the end of this book honestly read almost like a mystery. Like, you're just turning the pages trying to find out what actually happened with something. And yeah, I loved it. It sucked me in, and I highly recommend it. I haven't really seen many people read this yet. It came out in September, but if you like Jandy Nelson, then I highly recommend this book. So my number 8 book of the year is The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer, and I'm honestly a little surprised that this made it to the list, because I read The Wishing Game, this author's debut book, last year, and I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as a lot of people did. But then this came out, and especially my friend Sid was obsessed with this book. Every person I saw reading this book said it was better than The Wishing Game, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give it a try, and I read it because of Sid, and I loved it. So this follows, how do I want to explain it without giving too much away, because honestly I feel the inside flap gives a bit too much away because I didn't know a lot of this before going into it. So what I'll say is you're following this girl Emily, and when she was very young her sister was kidnapped, and I think this was like 15 years ago. Okay, I had to pause filming for a second, but I was saying her sister was kidnapped about 15 years ago and she never found out what happened. So she contacts this guy named Jeremy, who is famous for when he was around 15 years old, him and his best friend went missing in the woods, and they were gone for 6 months, and then they just randomly reappeared one day. And when the woods were searched to try to find these boys, it just doesn't really make sense how they didn't find them and then they just like came out of the woods one day and they were fine. One of them, not Jeremy but his best friend Rafe, lost his memory. So he remembers nothing that happened while they were in the woods, and Jeremy does remember, but he refuses to tell Rafe what happened. So now Jeremy is known for being able to find missing girls. Like he just has this like knack for just knowing where they are, whether they're still alive or they're just trying to find the remains to give closure to the family. So Emily decides that she needs to find this guy because he will be able to tell her what happened to her sister. So he goes and finds him, and the story ensues. And so this book, like, I would definitely say this is like a middle grade for adults because the story is so whimsical and magical, but it is also very dark. Like, I definitely would not recommend this to the middle grade age group, but I'm saying there are parts of this book that kind of made me feel like a kid again, and then there are other parts of this book that's like, never mind. We're back in the world of adults. And I just loved the way this was written. This book is also very queer, which I love to see, and there was just something about it that felt very healing for me, and I can't really explain what about it was healing, but just a very specific part of this just like healed something in me, and that's all I can really say. But I just really love this, and I highly recommend to anyone. Even if you didn't like The Wishing Game, I would still recommend this. But I will say it does get quite dark. There are mentions, I mean, her sister got kidnapped, so trigger warnings for that. And there's also mentions of violence against women, and also there is an abusive parent in this book, so just keep that in mind before picking this up. But I loved it so much, and obviously I loved it because it's my best books of the year. Okay, so the next book is probably the most surprising book to make my top 10, and it actually is a middle grade, and that is The Only Black Girls in Town by Brandy Colbert. The only reason I had heard of this book was because of Kayla from Books and Lala. If you saw my recent video where I completed the Buzzwordathon by reading her favorite books, I read this for one of the prompts for Buzzwordathon, and I really didn't know what I was getting into. I don't read a lot of middle grade anymore, but this year really proved to me that I should be still reading middle grade, because I think I read 2 this year and I gave them both 5 stars. The other one was Amari and the Night Brothers, which was in my honorable mentions. But this follows this girl named Alberta, and she lives in a very small coastal town, and her family is the only black family in the town until she gets word that another black family is moving in to this like deserted B&B, another B&B. And she finds out that this family has a daughter that is the exact same age as Alberta and will be going to the same school as her. So she's very excited to meet this new friend. Hello. Okay, that was weird. Anyways, so she's very excited to meet this new girl, and she's hoping that they could be best friends. But Alberta's also going through some hard times with her current best friend because she feels like she's starting to change. She's starting to get really close with Alberta's bully, who honestly has acted quite racist towards Alberta, and her best friend is just like, oh, she's just joking, because she doesn't really understand racism or microaggressions because she's white and also 12. So it's just a lot about Alberta going through this period, which in my opinion is like the worst period of life, like when you're 12 years old. It really sucks. And this book really like puts you back in the head of a 12-year-old, and I was like, damn, Like, I forgot how awful it is to be 12, because not only is she going through so many changes in terms of her own body, her family, her friends, school even. She has the added challenge of being one of the only black kids in a primarily white town, and her and her family experience some microaggressions and some racism, and it's just, I feel like I'm not doing this book justice trying to explain it, but the way, like, I listened to this book on audiobook and I just did not want to stop listening because I wanted to know what would happen. I was so invested in Alberta's story and what was happening with her friends, and also there was another storyline where her and the new girl, I can't remember her name, but they team up because they find these letters in the B&B from the woman who used to live there, and they're trying to kind of figure out this mystery about them. And I really loved it, and I just thought it was a really great book. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. And like I said, this was my most surprising book that made my top 10 because I didn't think middle grade was really for me anymore, and I love this book so much. So if you have read this book, let me know. I would love to talk about this book with more people. I just thought it was so good. It was so well written, and I loved it. The next book we have, I'm so excited about. I think this is number 5, but this is The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. I read this, I think back in, I think it was beginning of July I read this, and this book just sucked me in. So this is about, what are our characters' names? Okay, there's Anna, and I think his name's West? Yeah, Anna and West. So essentially these two, while they're in school, they kind of come up with this arrangement because they both, well, I can't remember his reason, but her reason is because she is kind of low on money, and so to kind of save cost, her and him get married so that they can have, I can't remember the exact details, but like essentially they get shared housing on campus, but the shared housing is only for married couples. It's something like that, I don't remember. But all you need to know is that they get married for like convenient reasons, marriage of convenience if you will, and then while they're married and they live together, they don't even really talk to each other. Like they're not close at all. They're not even really friends. They're just kind of like acquaintances. School ends, they move out. They're just kind of like, okay, great, it was nice knowing you. And Anna assumes that West will take care of the divorce. But he finds out, because it turns out West is actually from a very, very wealthy family, like very wealthy. Very wealthy, and he finds out that he has to be married for 5 years in order to receive, I think it's his grandfather's inheritance or someone's inheritance. The details are a bit fuzzy for me about this book, but the basics are they're married, marriage of convenience. He needs to stay married to receive a large amount of money. I don't remember much more than that. So it's like 4 years after they got married, so they just need to stay married for like 1 more year. And he, up until now, he's been able to get away with just like making excuses for why his family has never met his wife. But now his sister is getting married, and his whole family is like, okay, well, you have to bring your wife to the wedding, like we have to meet her. And so he's like so close to being able to keep her out of the situation, but he doesn't see any way around it. So he contacts Anna again, and he's like, hey, by the way, we never actually got divorced, and I need you to do this huge favor for me. So she agrees. I don't remember her reason for agreeing, but it might just be because the wedding is on this very beautiful island in Indonesia. So she's like, okay, I'll go. So she goes, so they're like fake husband and wife, and she has to keep up appearances for his family and act like his wife. But the thing is, as I mentioned, this family is very wealthy. She is not very wealthy. She lives very modestly. She is a painter and is trying to get her career off the ground. And she's also taking care of her dad, who has a lot of health problems. And so all her money is basically going to helping her dad. So, oh, that is why. I just remembered that's why she agrees to help him, is that he says that he'll give her some of the money that he inherits. Anyways, all that to say, they go to this island, they pretend to be married. Of course, they're gonna fall in love in the process. And not only did I love the romance in this book, because I loved it. I thought this was so, so cute, but I also loved the discussion on like class and wealth and how like billionaires should not exist. I thought it was honestly a really smart book, and it made me think a lot, and I just love the commentary on wealth and, you know, everything that comes with it. And I don't know, like it was, I love a romance book that also like really makes you think, and this one definitely made me think, and now I'm looking through it and I'm like, maybe I should reread this, I don't know. But like I said, I did love the romance in this book. I also read this right before going to Bali, and this doesn't take place in Bali, but it is on an island in Indonesia, and they their layover is in Singapore, and my layover was in Singapore, so they're like, oh, we had this huge flight to Singapore and then another flight to Indonesia, and I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. So that was also just like a fun element added to the reading experience. But yeah, if you haven't picked this book up yet, because I haven't read a recent Christina Lauren release since The Honeymooners, which I really loved also, but I've heard a lot of their books since then. A lot of people haven't really liked them, but this one I highly recommend. I feel like I maybe like this even more than The Honeymooners, but I haven't read that in a few years, so I'd have to reread it. Anyways, all that to say, I really love this book and I highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out yet. Okay, next at number 5, we have Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is one of the most fun books I read this year, and I think it's one of my favorite mysteries I've ever read, if not my favorite. I don't know if I would call this a thriller. I'm trying to remember, because this is another book that like I remember how much I enjoyed it. I do not remember too much about the story. What I do remember is our main character, I think his name is Ernest. He narrates the story and he breaks the fourth wall a lot, so he'll be like, so his job is basically writing how to write murder mystery books. So he doesn't write murder mystery books, he writes how to write murder mystery books. And this book is like kind of like another one of his how to write a murder mystery book, but based on an actual mystery that happened in his life. And so he breaks the fourth wall a lot, and he's like, just so you know, there's gonna be deaths on this page, this page, this page. And he'll also be like, you may think that this is suspicious what's happening right now, but I'm telling you it's not. I don't think this is anything more than what it is, like stuff like that, which I thought was super fun. But basically he and his family go to this like ski lodge where someone ends up being found dead. So he's kind of using his knowledge on mystery books to help solve the case, but he's also talking about how every person in his family has killed someone, including himself. And so throughout the book you kind of learn about everyone in his family and who they have killed in the past, and if maybe someone in his family is responsible for this person's death. And I loved this book. Like, I thought it was just so much fun, and I definitely see myself rereading this again because there's a lot about it that I don't remember. And even though I know like the big reveal at the end, which I did not see coming at all, like I know that I would still enjoy this book on reread and still like trying to find clues and what I missed throughout reading the book. So this is just like one of the most fun books I read this year. Honestly, one of the most fun books ever. And I know the sequels haven't really gotten great reviews, but this book is so good and I highly recommend it. I just really like this book, obviously, so I highly recommend. I feel like you can tell I'm starting to lose steam a bit. Okay, we have 4 more books to talk about. Number 4, which honestly, like the fact that this isn't higher than 4 just goes to show how much I loved my top 3 books of the year, because this is like one of my favorite books of all time. But this is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I started my Abby Jimenez journey this year. I read Part of Your World, which I really enjoyed, but this book like blew it out of the water. This book follows Brianna, who is the best friend in the first book, and Jacob, another Jacob, who I love with my whole heart. So they are both doctors, and Jacob is, he just started working at Brianna's hospital, and their relationship starts off with like just a series of misunderstandings. So Brianna thinks that he is like this huge jerk when he really isn't. He's like one of the kindest people ever, and so she like really hates this guy for no reason. But she is under a lot of stress right now because she's going through a divorce with her ex-husband, who is awful, and her brother is in dire need of a kidney transplant, and so she's just under a lot of stress. So when she meets Jacob, just a lot of misunderstandings happen, and she thinks he's this huge jerk. Jacob finds out that she doesn't like him very much, and so he wants to fix this, and he writes her a letter, and she thinks this is very romantic. She feels very bad about being so mean to him, and so they start writing letters back and forth to each other, and through this they start to get to know each other. There's also a fake dating element in this book because Jacob's brother is marrying his ex-girlfriend and he wants to show his family that he's fine, he's moved on, and so he has Brianna to pretend to be his girlfriend and come to family events for the wedding so that his family thinks that they're okay. The reason she agrees to do this is because she finds out that Jacob plans to donate his kidney to her brother and he wants it to be anonymous, but she ends up finding out anyway and she's like, I will literally do anything for you, like and so he's like, well, there is something you could do. Thus ensues fake dating, as it always happens in romance books. I don't think this ever happens in real life, but you know how it goes. And I just love their relationship. He is just the sweetest boy, and he also deals with anxiety, and the way anxiety is written in this book, I felt so seen. I don't think I've ever read a more like accurate description of how I experience anxiety. The only other book that I felt so seen was The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane, another one of my favorite books of all time. But this just made me feel so seen, and I was like, wow, Abby Jimenez really just like went into my head and was like, beep boop 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 boop, this is what Darian thinks, and then put it in this book. So I love this book for a lot of personal reasons, and I also found it was very realistic in terms of like the third act conflict. Normally, it's very easy to annoy me when it comes to the third act breakups and romance books, but this felt very realistic in terms of what both characters were going through, and I thought it was just all handled very well. There's also a trope at the end of this book that I know a lot of people don't like, but I love, so that just made me like it even more. But yes, this is one of my new favorite romance books ever, and I am planning on reading Just for the Summer soon, and I know everyone loves that book too, so I'm very excited to finish this little series. So my number 3 book of the year should be no surprise to anyone because I have not shut up about this book all year, but that is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. I love this book so much, and honestly I don't even own this book, but I am gifting this book to my friend tomorrow, and so I'm just like, hey, I have it, I'm gonna hold it up, but this will soon be my friend's. But anyways, so this is about Vera Wong, and she has this tea shop that honestly does not do very well. She has a rival like bakery nearby and she like despises the woman who owns that bakery. But anyways, so she lives on her own. Her son is off doing like things. He never answers her calls. She is just a very like lonely woman until one day she comes into her tea shop and finds a dead body, and so she's like, I'm gonna solve this murder, because she calls the police and the police are like, we don't have enough evidence to figure out what went wrong, and she's like, I can do this. So she takes it upon herself to figure out what happened to this man, and basically the like 4 customers that she got the day the man was murdered, she decides these are her top suspects. And this book, you follow in each person's perspective, so it's not only her perspective, but it's the 4 suspects. And the way this book just comes together, the way you kind of find out how all of these people are connected in some way, and also just the found family vibes of this book, because yes, Vera does accuse them of murder, but she also learns to love them and they learn to love her, and it's just so sweet. Like, this book really has everything. It has heart, it has very deep moments, very sad moments, but it also just like makes me so happy to think about. It's also hilarious. I loved Vera so much. She is so funny, and I'm so happy I read this book. I read it for the Literally Dead book club earlier in the year, and I really just want to reread this book. I'm not gonna keep this copy because it's for my friend, but what if I what if I just kept it? No, it's fine. But yes, I love this book so much, and if you haven't read it, like, I highly recommend it because I just had so much fun with this book, and I listened to the audiobook. I definitely recommend the audiobook. I thought it was so well done. And yeah, I just love this book so much. And even though, like, I will say the kind of reveal of what happened at the end, like, part of it was really obvious what happened, and then there was one part that I did not see coming at all, which honestly I feel like that was an unpopular thing. Like, I feel like everyone kind of saw what was coming, but the fact that it wasn't like this huge reveal at the end that was like a shocking plot twist did not deter from the book at all. Like, I think this book is less about the mystery and more about the relationships these people develop with each other, and also just them dealing with what has happened to them in their life. They are all kind of struggling through something right now, and I just love how this book was written. I loved it so much. I love the characters. Could not recommend it more. So now we're down to our last 2 books of the year. So my number 2 book of 2024, we all knew this was coming. I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. You can't, I mean, this cover is just a quote. This is the actual cover of the book. I don't know why this is a cover, but anyways, I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. As I mentioned earlier, love Jandy Nelson's writing, and this is probably her most popular book. I know this was all the rage in 2014. I really didn't expect to love this as much as I did because it was released in 2014. I thought there would be a lot about it that just didn't age well, that wouldn't hit as hard, and there's definitely parts, I don't remember exactly what they are. I feel like there were a few maybe fat-phobic remarks, but I do remember some things that didn't age super well, but other than that, I just love this book so much. You're following these two twins, Jude and Noah. So Noah's perspective is 3 years earlier, and then Jude's perspective is 3 years later, so like the present moment. And in between this time, you know that like they used to be inseparable, now they barely speak to each other. You don't know what happened. And this book just like I don't know how to talk about this because it's just so good. There's a lot about art in this book and how healing art can be, and I loved this. I read this at the exact right moment because I was reading this when I finished my master's program and I finished school forever, and that was like a huge moment for me, obviously. And this book also just felt like a huge moment for me, if that makes sense. I don't know, like it's not like these characters were also like finishing school or anything, but it felt like what I was feeling about finishing school is kind of like how these characters were feeling about whatever they were going through. I don't know if that makes sense at all. But yeah, like I said, this book is just a lot about how healing art can be, and also like the relationships we have with each other, and also just like humanity, and not only the relationships we have with like the people we love, but people we don't even know, how people can heal other people in like so many different ways. This book also deals with the topic of losing a parent, because in between these two timelines, Jude and Noah's mother dies in a tragic accident, and that obviously affects their lives a lot. And like I said earlier, Jandy Nelson's writing is like so for me. The way she writes this book, I will say, like from what I remember, it is a little heavier with the like metaphors and similes and stuff, and being like, oh my god, I'm flying into outer space. Like I just remember that being said, like it doesn't say it feels like I'm flying into outer space, it's like suddenly I'm being lifted up and flying into outer space. Like that's how she writes, even though you know the characters are not flying into outer space, you know. But anyways, I mean, I don't know what else to say about this book that hasn't already been said. I just love it so much. I don't know why I'm holding this up. You can't even see this. But anyways, I just loved it so much. And I'm so happy that it found me when it did, because I just really needed it in that moment, and will always be grateful for that. Okay, so we finally arrived to my favorite book of 2024, and I haven't even talked about this book in a video yet because I read it for a video that will hopefully be out sometime in January, but it might be February, honestly. But I read this at the beginning of December and it just like swept me away, and that is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. And again, this is a book I'm gifting my friend tomorrow. She's getting this and Vera Wong, and so I figured I would just hold it up, but I do not own this. And I definitely need to. What if I just kept them? No, it's too late now. Anyways, Martyr. So this book, how do you even explain this book properly? I'm telling you right now, there's no way I can explain this book well enough to accurately like convey how brilliant it is. You're following this character named Cyrus, who was born in Iran and then moved to America when he was very young. And his life has kind of been shaped by the idea of death, because his mother died in like this tragic accident when he was just a baby, so he never really knew his mom. He's very obsessed with this idea of death and having a meaningful death, and he often, I will say trigger warnings for suicidal ideation in this book, because he contemplates taking his own life, but he's very like not emotional about it. Like he doesn't think about it in an emotional way. He just thinks like, well, I might take my own life, but I want my death to mean something. Like he talks about it in a very like technical way. So, but you know, it's still there in the book, so keep that in mind. But yes, so he's obsessed with this idea of death, and he is a poet, and the author is also a poet. This is his debut novel, but like you can definitely tell that he's a poet because the writing is stunning in this book. and there were definitely points where I had to like reread what he was writing because I was like, what does this even mean? Like, this is too smart for me. He wants to write a book about the idea of martyrdom, and then finds out that there's this woman in New York who is holding this installation at a museum. I think it's the Met, but some museum in New York, and she has cancer and she only has a few weeks to live, and so she's decided to stop all treatment and spend the however much time she has left in this museum, and her installation is just her sitting there, and people can come in and talk to her, ask her about her life and her views on death and stuff like that. And so he hears about this right after he has his idea about writing this book, so he's like, oh my god, this is perfect, I'm gonna go see her and talk to her, and maybe I can use like some stuff she says for my book. And this ends up opening up a whole can of worms and kind of changes his life in a way that he could never expect. So that, I would say, is like the main plot of this book, but it's also just about life and how beautiful and how devastating life could be, and about death, and what it means for your death to mean something, and does everyone's death mean something, and how can you ensure that your death will mean something. And Cyrus is also going through addiction. He has been sober, I think it was a few years, I can't remember. He is a drug addict and an alcoholic, and he contemplates a lot about the death of his mom. And one thing I found super interesting about this book is that when you're in, because this book kind of jumps back and forth in perspectives and time. So when you're in Cyrus's chapters, the writing is written in third person. So you're not in his head for this book, but other chapters, it's the perspective of his best friend, it's the perspective of his dad, it's the perspective of his mom before she passed away. These different perspectives are not always in the present day, it'll often be in the past. Sometimes he has dreams where with like two random people, so I know Lisa Simpson is in one of the dreams, so you have like their perspectives, but his chapters are always in third person. And so I found that such an interesting way to tell the story, because it really centers him as the crux of the story, because you're never in his head, you're just viewing him from the outside and from how everyone in his life sees him, which I thought was just so interesting and such a like unique way to tell the story. This is definitely one of the most unique books I've ever read. It's one of those books that I feel like I need to write like an essay about this. Like, there's just so much to say about this book, and I feel very honored and grateful that I got to read it. Like, that's how I felt reading this book, is just like, wow, I feel so lucky that I get to read this book. And so I want to read anything that this author ever writes. I loved it so much, and I think people can just learn a lot from this book, because I loved it. I loved it so much, obviously. So yeah, we got through it. I feel like this took way longer to film than it usually does. I was just yapping away today, so I'm sorry this video was long, but thank you so much for watching. If you made it till the end, leave the sun emoji for I'll give you the sun. And also let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them, or if you're taking any recommendations away from this video. I would love it if more people read Martyr. I mean, I know it's pretty popular, like it was nominated for the National Book Award, so he's doing fine without me. But I still highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it yet. Okay, I'm gonna go lie down now, but yes. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon with another video soon. Bye!